3 minutes into the gala, the giant screen flashed my face, and my father sat right there in the front row, the man who'd once raised a glass and wished I was never born. He didn't know the microphone at his table was live, and I didn't know that night would start a domino reaction that would shatter his empire and force me to choose between a late apology or total freedom. My name is Maya Whitaker. I am 32 years old. I live in Denver, and my job is to find patterns in chaos. I'm a systems analyst at Northlight Systems, a simulation firm that helps large-scale companies optimize their operations. It is a fancy way of saying I stare at data models all day, trying to find the one broken node, the one inefficient algorithm that is slowing everything down. I find waste, I find flawed logic, I find the truth hidden in the spreadsheets. My work is logical, it is clean, and it is everything my family is not. I am the other daughter, the one who works with computers in a way they find vaguely disappointing, the one who lives in a downtown condo instead of a sprawling suburban house with a 2-car garage. I am the one who is not Delia. Delia is my younger sister. She is the golden child, the marketing vice president for a chic lifestyle brand, the one who always knew which fork to use and how to laugh at the right jokes at the right volume. Our parents, Richard and Eleanor Whitaker, do not just love Delia, they showcase her. She is their prize, their proof of successful parenting, their reflection. I am the quiet experiment, the one they do not know how to introduce at cocktail parties, the one who makes them slightly uncomfortable. The one person who never seemed uncomfortable was my grandfather, Luther Hale, 78 years old and built like the solid, immovable real estate he had spent his life acquiring. He was my mother's father, but he was nothing like her. He wasn't in tech. He wasn't in finance. He was in logistics, warehouses, shipping routes, the unsexy concrete bones of commerce that make the modern world turn. He was a man of few words, but immense presence. While my parents flashed their modern, brittle wealth, Luther still carried a worn leather briefcase and wrote meticulous notes in a journal with a fountain pen, a pen that bled a very specific shade of blue-black ink. The family tradition, for as long as I could remember, was Thanksgiving at Coyote Bluffs. This was not some cozy, rustic farmhouse. It was the Hale family estate, a sprawling, custom-built monument to new money, designed to look old. It sat on 100 acres of manicured, empty land just outside Fort Collins. Stone facades, towering ceilings, windows that looked out onto a landscape that was beautiful and sterile. It was a house designed for impressing, not for living. The prelude to the event always began on my phone. The preemptive strikes, my mother, Eleanor, had texted me yesterday. Maya, please just be agreeable. No complex topics, no work talk. Let's just have one nice holiday for a change. Don't be awkward. Don't be yourself. Don't be the analyst. Then, this morning, a text from Delia. Can't wait for you to finally meet Evan properly. He's done so well for himself, so just try to be humble. It's a big day for us. The implication hung in the air between Denver and Fort Collins. My life, my achievements, were small, gray things compared to the glittering prize of the man she had secured. For years, those texts would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and anxiety. I would have spent the 90-minute drive up the highway rehearsing bland anecdotes, practicing a smile that didn't show my teeth, bracing for the inevitable comparisons. But this year was different. I felt a strange calm as I packed an overnight bag. I was not going to seek their approval. I was not going to fight for their attention. I was going as an observer. I was, in my own quiet way, going to say goodbye. Not to them, necessarily, but to the toxic, silent habit of needing them to see me. I was going to collect my final data points. I parked my practical sedan, a stark contrast to the gleaming German SUVs and Evan's obnoxious, oversized truck already lining the gravel driveway. I walked in at exactly 6:30. The house was wrapped in its signature cold politeness. The lighting was perfect. All warm glows and artfully placed candelabras. The scent of pine and expensive roast turkey filled the air, a scent manufactured to signal home. My mother greeted me at the door, her smile flawless and rigid. "Maya, you're here." She gave me a kiss that landed on the air just beside my cheek. "Your coat? You look fine." My father, Richard, looked up from his conversation and gave me a firm, brief nod. "Maya, good to see you." Standard greetings, measured and devoid of any real warmth. The emotion in this house was always repressed, pushed down beneath layers of expensive cashmere and social obligation. It was a system, and I was the variable that didn't fit the equation. I scanned the room for my grandfather. He was not there. Delia, however, was holding court, and Evan just said, "Well, if they want the logistics hub built in under 8 months, they have to pay for the A-team." She laughed, her left hand strategically placed on her fiancé's arm. The ring was blinding, a colorless, flawless rock that seemed to suck all the light in the room toward it. And there was the fiancé himself, Evan Kress. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, overly confident, with a tan that looked expensive and a smile that did not reach his eyes. A logistics contractor. He was, I realized, in my grandfather's industry, or at least a shallow version of it. I slipped past the living room performance and went toward the kitchen. It was my usual escape. The catering staff, hired for the event, were moving with quiet efficiency. I saw Maria, the head caterer who had worked these events for years, struggling with a heavy tray of appetizers. I moved to help her, taking one side. "Let me get that." She gave me a genuinely warm smile, the first one I had received since arriving. "Miss Maya, thank you. You are always the one to help." "Habit," I said, helping her set it down. We chatted for a moment about the new traffic patterns on the highway, a brief, normal conversation about system efficiency. It was comfortable. It was real. "Maya!" The voice came from the doorway. It was my grandfather, Luther. He was just standing there, watching. He was a tall man, still imposing at 78. He wore a simple tweed jacket, and his eyes, still sharp, seemed to take in the entire scene. He did not smile, but he held my gaze for a long second, then nodded. Once, a single, brief acknowledgement. He had seen me bypass the performance in the living room and go straight to the work. He had always seen it. I returned to the living room, a glass of sparkling water in hand, just as my father was raising his. "A toast," he announced, beaming, "to Delia and Evan, and to the new contract." My mother chimed in, her voice bright with pride. "Evan's company just landed the massive contract for the new distribution center south of the city. He's handling the whole build-out." Evan draped a proprietary arm over Delia's shoulder. "Well, it helps when your partners believe in the vision," he said, his voice slick. "We're funded by a new private equity group, very quiet, very exclusive." My father nodded sagely, as if he understood these things. "An anonymous fund, smart, very smart, keeps the competition guessing." I watched them, Delia, Evan, my parents, a perfect, self-congratulatory tableau. I felt the familiar ache of invisibility, but this time it was mixed with something else, curiosity. I found a seat away from the main circle, near the unlit fireplace. Next to me was the large leather armchair where my grandfather always sat. He was not in it yet, but his briefcase was. It was placed on the floor right beside the chair, as if guarding it. It was the same one he had carried for 30 years. Brown leather, worn smooth at the corners, the brass clasps dull with age. I saw it clearly from my vantage point. A small, dark smudge on the main locking clasp. Blue-black ink, the same ink he used for his journals, the same ink from the few, cryptic postcards he had sent me over the years. The call for dinner came at 7:30. We moved from the performative casualness of the living room to the rigid formality of the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for 9, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the flickering candles. The silence began as soon as we sat down. It was different from the usual pre-dinner chatter. It was not a comfortable silence. It was heavy, a vacuum waiting to be filled. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at the head of the table, where Luther now sat. Delia was adjusting her napkin, her ring catching the light. Evan cleared his throat. It was an awkward, profound stillness. It felt like the entire house, the entire Coyote Bluffs estate, was holding its breath. It felt like we were all waiting for a signal, waiting for the explosion. That silence at the table was not new. It was just louder. It was the same silence that had followed me my entire life, the negative space that defined my position in the Whitaker family structure. The difference, in childhood, was that the silence was always filled by Delia's noise, Delia's piano recitals, where she would play a piece flawlessly, and our parents would leap to their feet for the standing ovation. Delia's debate team trophies, which lined the living room mantel, Delia's perfect report cards, taped to the refrigerator. She was a constant, glittering parade of achievements, and she was rewarded in kind. For her 10th birthday, she was given a pony, or at least the promise of one, which materialized as an expensive series of riding lessons that she complained about but excelled at. That same year, for my 12th birthday, I received a Young Engineer toolkit. It came in a flimsy plastic case with a cheap soldering iron, a few wires, and a small motor. My father gave it to me with a laugh. "Maybe you can fix the toaster, Maya. Just don't burn the house down, and don't make a mess." Delia got ribbons. I got a warning. But I loved that toolkit. I took it to the one place in the house that felt like mine, the garage. It was cold, smelled of oil and old tires, but it was a sanctuary. I started with the toaster. I took it apart on my father's workbench, meticulously drawing each piece, each connection, before I diagnosed the faulty heating coil. It was logical. It was a puzzle with a real answer. The next year, I entered the district science fair. My project was an automated irrigation system for a small garden, built from salvaged parts, that used a moisture sensor to determine when to water. It was clunky, housed in a Tupperware container, but it worked. It was efficient. It solved a problem. When I won first prize for the 8th grade category, I came home with a large blue ribbon and a certificate. My mother looked at it, her head tilted. "Oh, that's complex, dear. Well, good for you." My father just pointed at my hands, smudged with solder flux and dirt. "Just make sure you wash up, and don't get that grease on the good towels. Don't make a mess in the garage. Maya, it's where I park the car." There was no celebration, no dinner out. The ribbon was never hung on the mantel. It stayed in a drawer in my room. A week later, a package arrived. It was small, heavy, and addressed to me. Inside were 3 hard-bound, dot-grid notebooks and a fountain pen. There was no card, but I recognized the precise angular return address: Luther Hale. He called that evening. His calls were rare, and always brief. "Did you receive the package?" "Yes, Grandpa. Thank you." "Good. Those are for you. Use them." There was a pause. "I heard about the science fair. Good work on the sensor." I was stunned. "How did you know?" "I read the school district newsletter," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Use the notebooks. Maya, write down the things other people are too busy to see. Record what others ignore." The garage became my laboratory. Those notebooks became my blueprints. I taught myself to repair old radios, to understand circuit boards, to find the logic in the static. While Delia was at prom fittings, I was in the garage, feeling the quiet, satisfied hum of a repaired amplifier. It was the only place I felt truly at peace, truly competent. The pattern held for years. Delia's successes were public announcements. My successes were private, quiet, and often viewed as inconvenient. When I was 18, I received the letter, a full-ride scholarship for systems engineering to one of the best programs in the country. It was 4 states away. It was my escape pod. I brought the letter to the dinner table, my hands shaking. "I got it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The full scholarship, to the university." My mother's smile was strained. "Oh, Maya, That's wonderful, but it's so far away. Eleanor is right, my father said, not looking up from his plate. What about the state school? It's a perfectly good school. You could stay local. Holidays are important, you know. It's important for the family to be together. Delia just rolled her eyes. Why would you want to do more math? It's weird. Their reaction was not joy. It was not pride. It was as if I had just announced I was moving to the moon, a selfish, strange decision that complicated their lives. They saw my future not as an opportunity, but as an interruption. 2 months later, I left. My parents did not drive me to the bus station. They had an important dinner for my father's firm. I took a taxi before dawn. My life packed into 2 suitcases. The bus depot was cold, smelling of diesel and disinfectant. As the first gray light of morning hit the pavement, I climbed onto the bus. There was no celebratory hug, no tearful goodbye, just the quiet click of the bus door hissing shut, sealing me off from them. The first few years of my career were a grind. I was learning a new kind of silence. The hum of a server room at 3 a.m. I worked night shifts at a data center to pay for my tiny apartment. I self-studied. I took online courses. I reverse-engineered code. I was obsessed with optimization. I would stare at logistics problems, finding the inefficient shipping routes, the wasted milliseconds in data transfer. It was the garage, all over again, but on a massive scale. My first big break was an internal tool I built. I was working a contract for a network of regional health clinics. Their system for ordering and managing medical supplies was a disaster. They were bleeding money, over-ordering some things, running out of critical others. I spent 2 weeks, mostly on my own time, writing a small, predictive algorithm. It analyzed their usage patterns, cross-referenced shipping manifests, and created an optimized, automated ordering schedule. It was simple, logical, and it saved them, as I later found out, nearly $500,000 in their first year. I was proud of it. I tried to explain it to my family during a rare visit home. It's about predictive allocation, I said. It just looks at the data to stop the waste before it... Oh, speaking of waste, Delia interrupted. Evan just bought me the most ridiculously expensive handbag. It's a total waste of money, but it's gorgeous. My parents turned, eager to hear the story. I went quiet. My work was invisible to them. My world was invisible. The only person who seemed to be tracking my frequency was Luther. Every few months, an unsigned postcard would appear in my mailbox, a picture of a bridge, or a dam, or a complex railway yard. On the back, just a few words in that distinctive blue-black ink. Keep recording. A good system is an honest system. And the one that stuck with me, truth has its own rhythm. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. He never signed his name. He never had to. I learned to adapt. I learned to be present without being seen. I would go to family events, sit at the table, and observe. I became an analyst of my own family. I watched the alliances shift, the subtle transactions of approval and disappointment. I was the ghost at the feast, the quiet data entry clerk in the corner. And every night, before I went to bed, I would open my own dot grid notebook. The habit, ingrained in me by my grandfather, had become a lifeline. I would write down the day's events, the data points, the small frustrations, and I always ended with the same 5 words, a promise to myself. Don't let yourself disappear. Sitting at that Thanksgiving table, the silence pressing in. I thought of that line. The rift in our family had not come from one single, dramatic punch. It was not a grand betrayal. It was the slow, steady, crushing weight of 1,000 invisible cuts, 1,000 moments of being looked through, 1,000 times they had chosen not to see. The heavy silence that pooled on the Thanksgiving table had started its accumulation exactly 1 week prior. My phone rang at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. The caller ID was unknown, but I answered it anyway. An old reflex from my job, where critical system failures often came from blocked, panicked numbers at odd hours. Maya. The voice was gravelly, immediate, and unmistakable. My grandfather. He had not called my personal cell phone in, perhaps, ever. Grandpa, is everything okay? I am fine. There was a distinct pause, a space he used to measure the weight of his next words. You will come to Thanksgiving this year. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Yes, I was planning to. Be at Coyote Bluffs at 6:30, exactly 6:30? I frowned. Okay. Another pause, this one heavier, charged with something I could not identify. And Maya, bring your memory. He hung up. He did not say goodbye. He did not say, I love you, or see you then. He simply delivered the command and terminated the connection. Bring your memory. It was a systems directive, not a sentimental request. As if his call had triggered a warning algorithm, the rest of the family's pre-holiday maneuvers began. My mother's text arrived 2 days later. Maya, darling, so glad you are coming. A simple outfit would be best, navy or gray. And please, let's just enjoy the family time. No need to discuss your complex projects. It just confuses people. The translation was clear, as it always was. You confuse people, be smaller, do not be yourself. Then, the morning of Thanksgiving, just as I was preparing to leave Denver, Delia's contribution arrived. It was not a message, but a link sent via text, a glossy feature from Denver Business Monthly. The headline, The New Face of Front Range Logistics, Evan Kress Builds the Future. It was a fawning, breathless piece about his vision, his rapid expansion, and the dynamic energy he was bringing to the industry. Below the link, Delia had added a simple, saccharine note, laced with her particular brand of arsenic. Just so you're up to speed on Evan's success. So proud. See you tonight, X. Know your place. Be impressed. In any other year, I would have sighed, deleted the message, and spent the 90-minute drive bracing myself. But this year, Delia's text was a mistake. It was a data point I had not intended to analyze, but the article provided a crucial variable I had been missing: the full legal name of Evan's primary LLC, Kress Logistics Partners. I am a systems analyst. I find patterns in chaos. It is what I do. It is who I am. I was not digging for dirt. I was just curious. It was a professional reflex, the same instinct that made me take apart the toaster. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat at my laptop. I spent an hour navigating the public databases, Secretary of State filings, property records, UCC liens. It was all there. A digital breadcrumb trail left for anyone who knew how to read the code. Kress Logistics Partners was new, formed only 14 months ago. It was thinly capitalized, yet it had, just 2 months ago, acquired the massive parcel of land for the distribution center my father had been bragging about. How? I found the financing statements. The funding was not from a traditional bank. It was from a private equity group, my father's anonymous fund. The name was Haven Ridge Holdings, LLC. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Haven Ridge Holdings was a ghost, a shell, formed 6 months ago, registered in Delaware, but filed to do business in Colorado. It had no public website, no press releases, no listed partners, but the filings had to be signed: a registered agent, a managing member, an authorized representative. I pulled up the scanned PDF of the Articles of Organization, and I stopped. My breath caught. The signature was not a digital scrawl. It was a high-resolution scan of a physical signature. It was angular, precise, and written with a heavy, wet ink that feathered just slightly on the cheap state document paper. It was a signature I had seen only a few times in my life, on the bottom of those postcards, and on the one check he had ever written me as a graduation present. It was Luther Hale's. The blue-black ink, the distinctive sharp H, the severe controlled script. My grandfather was Evan Kress's anonymous funder. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering a strange, cold rhythm against my ribs. This was not a simple family dinner. This was not a coincidence. This was a test, a live simulation. My grandfather, the master of logistics, was moving pieces on a board. He had funded the Golden Boy, Delia's fiancé, and he had called me, the analyst, and told me to bring my memory. He was running an experiment. He was testing the system for flaws, and Evan Kress was the primary variable. I opened one of my own black dot grid notebooks, the ones he had given me all those years ago. I began to draw the map, a simple flowchart. Luther. An arrow pointed to Haven Ridge Holdings. An arrow from that box pointed to Kress Logistics Partners. I drew a dotted line connecting Evan to Delia. I drew another line connecting my parents, labeling it willfully ignorant, and then I drew a circle, separate from the others, and wrote, Maya, observer. I packed that notebook into my purse. My hands were shaking slightly on the drive up to Fort Collins. I needed an outside perspective. I needed a definition. I put on my headset and called the only person I trusted with complex, hypothetical problems, Clara Voss. We had been roommates in college. She was now a ruthlessly intelligent corporate lawyer in Chicago. Clara, hypothetical, I said, my voice tight. What is a conditional trust? Clara laughed, a dry, papery sound. Maya, you don't do hypotheticals. You do data. Who are you auditing? Wait, don't tell me. She paused, and I could hear her switch into professional mode. Okay, a conditional trust, or a conditional gift, is simple. It's a transfer of assets that only completes if certain conditions are met. I give you this, if you do that, but they can be tricky. They can be tests. What kind of tests? The interesting kind, she said, her voice sharpening with professional interest. The kind old money patriarchs love. They use them to test character, morals, ethics. I will fund your company if you remain honest. I will give you this inheritance if you don't become a degenerate. It is a way to control from beyond the grave, or in this case, from across the boardroom. Why? What did you find? I'm not sure yet, I said. It just feels staged, orchestrated. Clara was silent for a moment. Listen to me, Maya. I've seen these play out. If this is an ethics test, some old man's grand design, there will be a moment, a single moment where the whole thing hinges. The data will be presented, and a choice will have to be made. It's a moment hand. A moment hand? Yeah, like the second hand on a stopwatch. A single, sweeping moment of impact. My advice? When it lands, do not blink. Do not be the one who looks away. And for God's sake, do not be the one who lies to the man who set the test. I hung up as I pulled onto the long gravel driveway of Coyote Bluffs. Do not blink. I arrived at exactly 6:25. I parked the car. I locked my phone and left it in the glove compartment. I was going in clean. I was going in as an analyst. My only tools would be my memory and the black notebook in my purse. As I walked up the wide stone path, I made a decision. I would not sit at the far end of the table, the seat of invisibility I usually occupied. I would sit near the head. I would sit near my grandfather. I would sit where I could watch the test administrator. Before I rang the bell, I took out my notebook one last time. I flipped to my flowchart. I looked at the name Luther and the Kress Logistics box. I remembered the ink smudge I had seen on his briefcase clasp at the last family gathering. The briefcase was his portable office, his server. I uncapped my own pen and wrote a final note at the bottom of the page. If the briefcase is there, that is the switch. I put the notebook away and rang the bell at precisely 6:30. I stepped into the house, into the silence waiting to happen. The smell of roasted cedar planks from the fireplace and the sharp, fruity scent of expensive red wine hung heavy in the air. It was the familiar, suffocating perfume of wealth, designed to cover the smell of all the words that were never, ever spoken. The long mahogany table was a sterile, unforgiving landscape. A white linen runner, ironed to a sharp crease, ran its length. 9 places were set with the heavy, ornate Hale family silver, pieces that were only ever used at Thanksgiving and Christmas, polished to a painful gleam. The candle flames, 3 groups of them down the table, were perfectly still. their light reflecting in distorted, wavering shapes on the curved surfaces of the knives and spoons. The air was still, heavy with the scent of roasted meat and pine, but it was a cold, formal smell, not a warm one. My father, seated to my mother's right, cleared his throat and initiated the ritual. "A quick prayer," he said, his voice artificially resonant. We bowed our heads. It was a perfunctory, brief appeal for gratitude. Words spoken by rote, their meaning worn away by years of repetition. It ended with a clipped amen, and the choreographed rustle of 9 people shifting in their chairs and unfolding their thick linen napkins. My grandfather, Luther, sat at the head of the table. His chair was the largest, the only one with arms, a carved wooden throne that established his absolute authority in this room. I had placed myself to his left, close enough to observe. Delia and Evan were across from me, a glittering unit of success. My parents sat further down, flanking the empty space where the turkey would soon rest. For a moment, the only sound was the delicate, almost inaudible scrape of silver on porcelain as people took a sip of water or adjusted their plates. The silence was an active presence, a 10th guest at the table. Naturally, it was Delia who broke it. She could not tolerate a vacuum. She had to fill it with her own light. "Oh, it's just been madness," she began, her voice bright and brittle. She held her wineglass, her left hand angled perfectly to catch the candlelight on her new diamond. "Absolutely insane. Planning a wedding is a full-time job. More than a full-time job. Evan can attest." Evan, beside her, gave a practiced, indulgent smile. "She's a machine. I just stay out of the way." "We finally locked in the venue," Delia continued, looking at our mother, who was now rapt with attention. "Silverbriar Estate. It's breathtaking. You remember, Mom, we drove past it? It has the weeping willows and the new glass conservatory. Their deposit was staggering, but Evan insisted. He said our day had to be perfect." "And it will be, darling," my mother said, her voice dripping with an approval I had never received. "You deserve it." My father chimed in, leaning forward with a proprietary air. "Well, he can certainly afford it. This new contract is a game changer. It's all thanks to Evan's new partners, that silent fund, very smart, moving that quickly, having the capital to strike while the iron is hot. That's what separates the men from the boys." He beamed at Evan. Evan inclined his head, accepting the praise. "We've been fortunate, Richard. The partners have a lot of faith in our vision. They've given us the autonomy to move fast, cut through the red tape. It's about efficiency." My eyes flickered to my grandfather. He was not eating his bread. He was not drinking his water. He was perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the center of the table. His left hand rested on the arm of his chair. His right hand, however, was not on the table. It was down by his side, resting on the worn leather of the briefcase I had seen him bring in, which he had placed on the floor beside his chair, just as he had in the living room. And his fingers were moving. I watched, not daring to move my head, only my eyes. His index finger tapped the leather. Once, twice, 3 times, a pause, then 3 more times. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It was the signal. I had seen it twice before in my life. The first time was in his office, when I was 16, waiting for him to drive me home. A group of developers was trying to bully him into a bad deal. He sat, silent, for 10 minutes while they postured. Then, under the table, his fingers did that. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. He stood up, said, "The meeting is over," and had security escort them out. He bought the land they wanted for half their asking price 6 months later. The second time was at my grandmother's funeral, during the eulogy, when a distant, grasping cousin began to reminisce about how much my grandmother had promised him. Luther's hand, resting on the pew, tapped out the rhythm. The cousin was written out of the will the next day. It was his decision-making protocol. It was the motion of his mind locking a final sequence in place. It was the sound of a judge's gavel, translated into flesh and bone. He was doing it now, in response to my father's fawning and Evan's modest, slick acceptance of the praise. My blood went cold, but my mind was sharp. Bring your memory. Do not blink. At that exact moment, the swinging door from the kitchen opened. Maria, the head caterer, entered, followed by another server. They carried the main event, a massive, perfectly browned turkey on a silver platter, surrounded by artful bunches of sage and roasted cranberries. The performance at the table paused. Delia stopped talking. My father made a low, appreciative sound. The servers placed the platter directly in front of my grandfather. It was a magnificent sight, a picture-perfect Thanksgiving. Maria placed the long, stag-handled carving knife and fork beside the platter, their silver tips resting inches from Luther's right hand. The room waited. This was his role, the patriarch. He was to stand, make a brief, welcoming speech, and carve the bird. The servers retreated. The door swung shut. The silence returned. But this time it was expectant, hungry. Luther Hale did not stand. He did not look at the turkey. He did not touch the carving knife. He bent down, his movements deliberate, and with a slight grunt, lifted the heavy leather briefcase from the floor. He placed it squarely on the table in front of him, pushing the carving knife and the magnificent platter 3 inches to the side to make room. 9 pairs of eyes stared at the briefcase. It was old, scarred, the leather soft as fabric at the corners, the brass clasps dark with patina. Delia gave a small, nervous laugh. "Grandpa, are you checking emails? It's Thanksgiving." Luther ignored her. His gaze was fixed on the briefcase. He slowly, deliberately, put his thumb and forefinger on the main clasp, the one with the blue-black ink smudge I had seen earlier. He pushed the clasp sideways. The sound it made was an explosion in the dead quiet, a single, metallic snick. It was not loud, but it was violent. It was the sound of a lock being disengaged, a sound that sliced through the room and made everyone flinch. Evan, who had been leaning back in his chair, sat up straight. His water glass wobbled. My mother's face, which had been arranged in a mask of hostess-like pleasantry, suddenly lost all its color. Her eyes darted to my father, then to Luther. Delia's smile froze, becoming a brittle, confused grimace. My father opened his mouth, as if to make a joke, saw the look on my grandfather's face, and closed it again. My grandfather looked up, his eyes, clear and cold as winter water, swept the table. He looked at my parents, at Delia, at Evan. Finally, his gaze met mine. I did not look away. I did not blink. He held my gaze for one long, suffocating second, and I felt as if he was downloading 30 years of data, of observation, directly into me. Then he turned his attention back to the room at large. He spoke, his voice not raised, but low and gravelly, carrying an absolute weight that filled every corner of the room. "Tonight," he said, "we eat the truth first, then we will eat dinner." Evan's throat bobbed as he swallowed, a movement that was suddenly, grotesquely visible. Delia's hand, the one with the ring, went to her necklace, a nervous, fluttering gesture. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. I felt a cold, sharp-edged clarity settle into my spine. My hands, resting in my lap, were perfectly still. My breathing was even. I was no longer a ghost. I was an analyst, and the simulation was now live. With his hand still resting on the briefcase, Luther lifted the lid. The old leather creaked. He did not open it all the way, but just enough to reach inside. His hand emerged. First, a thick-bound manila file folder. It was at least 2 inches thick, held together with rubber bands. He placed it on the table. Second, a small, black digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use. He placed it next to the file. Third, a clear plastic USB drive, the kind that shows the circuitry inside. It was sealed in a small, anti-static evidence bag. He placed that next to the recorder. Finally, he reached in and pulled out a single, cream-colored, business-sized envelope. It was thick, heavy cardstock. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the table, separate from the other items, sliding it across the polished wood until it stopped, perfectly, right in front of me. My name, Maya, was written on it, in precise, blue-black fountain pen ink. My gaze was locked on the cream-colored envelope, on the stark, familiar script of my name. The entire room had become a high-pressure system, the air thick and unbreathable. No one moved. The magnificent turkey sat between us, a cooling, irrelevant monument. My grandfather's hand, large and spotted with age, moved first. It dismissed the envelope for me and went to the thick manila folder. He snapped the 2 rubber bands holding it shut. The thwack of them hitting the leather briefcase was a small, violent sound. "Item 1, he said, his voice a low, emotionless declaration. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, bound by a simple binder clip. The articles of incorporation and the mission statement for the Hale Family Trust. He looked at my parents, then at Delia. "You have all enjoyed the benefits of this trust for years. The dividends, the gifts. You assumed it was just money. You were wrong." He slid the top page onto the table. "The trust," he continued, "is not a personal bank account. It is a registered 501c3 charitable foundation. Its sole, legally binding purpose, which I established 30 years ago, is to fund community infrastructure projects, libraries, public utility upgrades, vocational training centers. It is not for personal use." My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father stared, confused. "Luther, what are you talking about? Of course we know about the trust." "You know of its existence," Luther corrected, his eyes cold. "You have never bothered to read its charter, which brings me to item 2. He reached for the second set of documents in the folder. He pulled them out and placed them directly in front of Evan Kress. "The loan agreement, executed 2 months ago, between the Hale Family Trust and Kress Logistics Partners, LLC. Evan stared at the document as if it were a snake. "I funded your company, Mr. Kress," my grandfather said, "through my anonymous fund, Haven Ridge Holdings, which exists as the administrative arm of the trust. I was, as you so aptly put it, your easy partner. I advanced your company a seed loan of $750,000, not as a gift, as a test." He tapped the front page. "This agreement, which you signed, was an integrity test. Clause 14, Section 1. You will find it highlighted." Evan's eyes darted to the page. "It states," Luther continued, as if reading from memory, "that all expenditures, project-related or operational, in excess of $5,000, must be reported to the Trust's administrative board prior to disbursement, with full vendor transparency, a simple clause, a test of honesty." It's all there," Evan stammered, trying to find his slick, confident voice. "The accounting is it's complex. We're moving fast." "So fast," Luther said, his hand already moving to the third and final stack of documents, "that you did not have time to read your own bank statements. Item 3. He did not slide these. He dropped them. A stack of paper, perhaps 50 pages, landed on the table with a heavy, final thud. They were copies of bank statements. "The statements for Kress Logistics Partners," Luther narrated, "and a new entity, formed 6 weeks ago, called Kress Whitaker Holdings, a shell. Mr. Kress, your accounting, I must say, is not complex. It is just clumsy." His finger landed on a line item. "Here we have it. A transfer, dated 3 weeks ago, $120,000, from Kress Logistics Partners to Kress Whitaker Holdings, and from there," his finger moved, "a payment, same day, same amount, to Silver Briar Estate, the deposit for your wedding, I presume?" Delia let out a sound, a small, strangled gasp. That is a lie," Evan said, but his voice was thin, reedy. "That's a prepayment for a corporate retreat, an investor event." "An investor event," Luther repeated, his voice dangerously quiet, "at Silver Briar Estate, an event you listed on the wire transfer memo as engagement party. My father, Richard, finally found his voice. It was booming and furious. Enough, Luther. I will not have this at my table. This is Thanksgiving. Whatever business dispute you have with this young man, you will take it outside. This is a family meal. My grandfather turned his head, very slowly, to look at my father. He held his gaze until my father, the blustering, confident man, shrank in his chair. The dinner table. Richard, Luther said, his voice a low rumble, exists for precisely this. It exists so we do not have to swallow our lies alone. You have been swallowing them for years. Content and ignorant. I am simply serving the truth, and it seems to have a bitter taste. He turned his gaze back to the center of the table, and it is not just Mr. Kress who has been dishonest in his accounting. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a printout. I recognized the format instantly, a group chat. The family's internal accounting, Luther said, his eyes scanning the page. I was inadvertently included in this chain. I believe the one discussing the seating chart for this very dinner. Delia's face went white. My mother looked as if she would faint. Ah, here it is, Luther read, his voice flat. Can we please make sure Maya is at the end of the table? Or at least not in the center shots. She has that severe look. She'll ruin the photos. Evan's partners will be in the pictures. We need to look perfect. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over his daughter, Eleanor, and his granddaughter, Delia. I was not aware my other granddaughter's severe look was a financial liability. You spied on us? Delia shrieked, her voice cracking. This is private. This is… Maya, you did this. You've always been jealous. You've always been digging, trying to ruin everything. She turned on me, her face a mask of rage. I just looked at her, my hands still in my lap. I did not say a word. The past, Delia, my grandfather cut in, his voice sharp as the unused carving knife, is simply an unpaid bill, and I am here to collect. He picked up the small, black digital recorder. As for digging, Mr. Kress, he said, holding the recorder up, I find I do not have to. The truth, in my experience, often volunteers. This device contains the audio from your last 2 investment meetings, all legally recorded, of course, with the full consent of all parties. It is part of the administrative review clause you initialed, but clearly did not read. He pressed a button on the side. Click. The room filled with Evan's voice. It was slick, confident, and laughing. The old man? He's a dream. Threw $750 at me. Didn't even blink. Doesn't read the reports. I'm telling you, he's so desperate to have a man of action in the family. He's letting me write my own checks. This wedding is just the start. He's easy. Click. Luther pressed the button again. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening, heavier than before, suffocating. Evan Kress was no longer tan. He was the color of old parchment, a waxy, pale yellow. Delia was not looking at me anymore. She was staring at Evan, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. My father looked at his plate. My mother was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks and onto the linen napkin she was clutching. And then, in the wreckage, my grandfather turned to me. The chaos washed around us, but we were in the eye of the storm. He pushed the cream-colored envelope, the one with my name on it, across the polished wood. It stopped in front of my plate. And now, Maya, he said, his voice softer, but still firm. The final appetizer. Open it. My fingers were steady. I did not look at anyone else. I slit the envelope open with my butter knife. Inside was a single, folded sheet of heavy stationery. I unfolded it. It was a letter, handwritten in his blue-black ink. The date at the top made my stomach lurch. It was dated 3 years ago. To the day. Read the last paragraph, Luther commanded, his voice for me alone. but loud enough for all to hear. Aloud. I found the last paragraph. I took a breath, and I read. My voice was clear, and it did not shake. You have been trained to see the systems others ignore. You have been trained in the garage, in the server rooms, in the quiet places where the real work is done. You have been taught to be invisible, but the truth is not invisible. Truth does not save those who refuse to see, but it liberates the one who dares to look. I looked up from the letter. My gaze met his. Do not blink. The room was a photograph of a disaster. The candles guttered, the food congealed. The magnificent, untouched turkey sat as a silent witness in the middle of the table, the sharp, silver carving knife resting beside it, gleaming and utterly useless. The room was a vacuum, hollowed out by the explosion of truth. Delia's face was a mask of shattered porcelain, the rage and indignation replaced by a cold, dawning horror as she stared at the man she was supposed to marry. Evan Kress was a ghost, pale and sweating, his eyes fixed on the bank statements as if he could will them into dust. My mother's quiet. Polite sobs were the only sound, each one a tiny, wet impact against the silence. My father just stared at his empty plate, his face rigid, as if he had been turned to stone. And in the center of it all, my grandfather, Luther Hale, sat like a mountain, unmoved by the avalanche he had just created. He looked at the wreckage he had made of our family tableau. Then, he looked at me. That, he said, his voice calm, was the accounting. Now, we move to the assets. He reached back into the open maw of the leather briefcase, the tension in the room, which I thought had reached its absolute peak, spiked again. What else could be in there? He did not pull out another manila folder. This was different. It was a thick, spiral-bound report, the kind I recognized from my own work, with a clear plastic cover and a heavy cardstock backing. It was at least 200 pages. He did not slide it. He placed it, gently, in the empty space between us, turning it so I could read the title. It read, The Northlight Civic Grid, a proposal for integrated community logistics. I stopped breathing. It was not possible. That was the name. That was my name. For my project. It was the thing I had worked on, alone, for years. It was the system I designed in my head while fixing radios in the garage. It was the algorithm I perfected in the server rooms at 3 a.m. It was my secret, my real work, a system to connect area food banks, shelters, and job training centers, to optimize their waste, the unused truck space, the leftover food, the empty classroom seats. It was the project I had tried, once, to explain to my parents, who had nodded vaguely and asked if I was still single. Where? My voice was a dry croak. Where did you get this? You left one of your notebooks in the garage. 4 years ago, on a visit, he said simply, as if admitting to borrowing a tool. I read it, so I read all the others. You really should have better security for your intellectual property. Maya? I stared at him, stunned by the violation, and, in the same contradictory moment, struck by a gratitude so profound it made my eyes burn. He had read them. He had read the work. Haven Ridge Holdings, he continued, as if giving a lecture, was established with 2 directives. The first was to run an integrity test. He jested, almost dismissively, toward Evan, who flinched. He, I am sorry to say, was the control group, the variable designed to fail. The second directive, he said, tapping the thick proposal, was to be the real anonymous partner. Haven Ridge Holdings has been, for the last 2 years, quietly funding the Northlight Civic Grid. My mind simply could not process the words. Funding? What do you mean? It's not a company. It's a proposal. It's a theory. It was a theory, he corrected. I set a test. Maya, for everyone, I put $750,000 of the trust's money into Mr. Kress's idea. I put $2 million of the trust's money into yours. A small, hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. $2 million? Grandpa, I don't have $2 million. I haven't seen a cent. Exactly, he said, And for the first time, a flash of genuine, fierce pride lit his eyes. That is the point. I wanted to see what would grow. I tested 2 systems, one built on image, one built on infrastructure. Mr. Kress, he said, turning his cold gaze back to Evan, was given capital and access. He immediately used it to build a shell, to buy influence, to pay for a wedding, to impress people. He turned back to me, his voice softening. You, Maya, were given nothing but the tools you asked for in your own notebooks. You just kept building. You kept optimizing the clinic systems. You kept volunteering. You kept refining the code. You passed the test you did not even know you were taking. I don't understand, I whispered. Where did the $2 million go? He reached into the briefcase one last time. His hand emerged, holding not a document, but a key. It was not a modern, small key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned brass key, the kind for a massive tumbler lock, attached to a simple, worn leather tag. He slid it across the table. It glided over the polished wood, silent, until it stopped, spinning once, just in front of my hand. It is not a car key, he said, cutting off the thought before it could even form. It is the key to the front door of the old consolidated shipping warehouse on Elm Street, the one the trust acquired 18 months ago. He paused, letting the silence build. It is no longer a warehouse, he said. It has been renovated. The network infrastructure is the fastest in the state. The loading bays have been converted. The offices are built. It is all there. Maya, everything you designed, the logistics hub, the training rooms, the cold storage for the food banks, it is now, officially, the Hale Commons. He let that hang in the air. The Hale Commons. It is finished, he said, his voice dropping. It is a perfect, beautiful system, and it is empty. It is just a building. It needs an operator. From his breast pocket, he pulled a single, folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it and laid it on the table. It was not from the briefcase. It was from him. This, he said, is the authorization, the board of the Hale Family Trust, effective today, cedes full operational control of the Hale Commons and its endowment to its new executive director. He looked me straight in the eye. Maya Whitaker. I felt the room tilt. The air was too thin. This was not validation. This was an abduction. This was a weight so immense I could not even calculate it. I looked at the key. I looked at the letter. I looked at the shattered faces of my family. I was not the ghost anymore. I was the one holding the bomb. This power was real, but it was born from the wreckage of this table. Delia was the first to find her voice. Her rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, stunned whisper. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Evan. Wait, she said, her voice cracking. You weren't the real investor? You weren't the man of action? You were just his project? A test? Evan Kress said nothing. He was a statue. The shell was, indeed, empty. My mother finally broke. Dad, please, she sobbed, turning to him. Please, stop. It's Thanksgiving. Look what you've done. It's terrible. But we are still a family. We can fix this. Can't we just talk? For the spirit of family. Luther turned his gaze on his daughter. My mother. His face was not angry. It was just sad. Eleanor, he said, and his voice was gentle, but as final as a closing door. You are missing the point. You have always missed the point. He stood up, slowly, his hands resting on the table. Family, he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room, is not a noun. It is not a static thing you own, or a picture you hang on the A-frame wall. It is not a spirit. Family is a verb. It is an action. It is work. It is the choice to build. It is the choice to repair. It is the choice to show up, every day, and tell the truth. He looked around the table, at his ruined family. And for 20 years, this family has been doing none of the work. It has just been sitting at the table, admiring the noun. His gaze landed on me, the full, undivided, heavy attention of the patriarch. The room was silent again, but it was a new silence. They were not waiting for him anymore. They were waiting for me. "The key is yours, Maya," he said. "The building is yours. The work is yours. If you accept it." He gestured to the letter in my hand, the one from 3 years ago, the one I had read aloud. "You read the second to last paragraph," he said, "but you did not finish. The test is not over, not for you." His eyes were sharp, challenging. "Do you dare to read the last line?" I looked down. I had stopped reading, my mind reeling from the liberation he had described. But he was right. There was one more sentence, a single line, separated from the paragraph above it. "When you are ready, press the button on this recorder." I looked at the black recorder on the table, the one that had played Evan's damning, laughing voice, but I had seen him press the play button. The last line in the letter was different. It said, "the button," as if there was only one. I looked at the device. I saw the play button, the stop, the rewind. And then I saw it. On the side of the device, separate from the main controls, was a single, small, round, red button, the record button. He was not asking me to listen to another truth. He was asking me to make one. My eyes were fixed on the small, red, circular button. "When you are ready, press the button on this recorder." He was not asking me to listen. He was asking me to speak, to add my own testimony to the pile, to make my own truth, to finally fill the silence with my own voice. It was the ultimate test. After a lifetime of being invisible, he was offering me the microphone. I looked at the red button, then I looked at my grandfather. My hand, which had been so steady, trembled. I had the power to document, to accuse, to finally say, "This is what you did. This is how you made me feel." I could record their reactions, their pleas, their broken apologies. I looked at my mother, who was staring at me with a new, terrified respect. I looked at Delia, whose hatred was now curdled with a pathetic, desperate confusion. I looked at Evan, a man already erased. I did not want to record them. I did not want to capture their ruin. I wanted to understand the system that had created it. My grandfather watched me. He saw the hesitation. He saw the analyst in me weighing the variables. He saw that I was not a creature of passion, but a creature of logic. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, not at the red button, but at the other button, the play button. I had been wrong. The letter, written 3 years ago, was not an instruction. It was a question. Was I ready? Was I ready to hear the rest of the truth? The part that was not about business fraud, but about me. The part he had saved for last. My hand moved. I bypassed the red record button. I pressed play. The recorder clicked. The digital counter started. And once again, the room filled with Evan's voice. But this was from a different meeting. This was not the arrogant sound of a man boasting. This was the conspiratorial sound of a man plotting. "It's simple," Evan's voice said, low and slick. "The Silverbriar deposit is $120K. We just code it as a consulting fee for the Cress-Whitaker Holding Company. The old man is a logistics guy. He's not looking at wedding blogs. He'll never see it." A new voice entered, older, more cautious. I assumed it was one of his advisors, or perhaps his own lawyer. "I don't know, Evan. Clause 14.1 is ironclad on reporting. It's a charitable trust. If he wants to audit, we're exposed. Do not underestimate this man." Then, Evan's laugh. It was the same laugh from the first recording. Arrogant, dismissive, and utterly stupid. Exposed? What is he going to do? Ask for the money back? Worst case scenario, I pay it back. I'll apologize. Say it was an accounting error. By then, the wedding will be done, the pictures will be out, and we'll be the it couple, the momentum. The momentum is worth the risk. He's easy. The recorder clicked off. A new kind of silence. The first recording was hubris. This was intent. This was fraud. Before anyone could speak, before Delia could even form a word of defense for this indefensible man, Luther pressed the play button again. It was not Evan's voice. It was my mother's. "Delia, darling, I'm just saying." My mother's voice, bright and conspiratorial, filled the room. "The main table photos are the most important. They're for the announcements. They're what everyone sees." Then, Delia's voice, "I know, Mom, and I'm telling you, I don't want her in the center shot. She has that look, you know." "Her severe look," my mother agreed, the voice of an ally. "It's what I've been saying. She's just not soft. And that suit she wore last year, God. Okay, I'll handle it. I'll tell Maria to set a place for her at the side table. With the cousins. She'll be comfortable there. She's always happier when she's not the center of attention anyway." Delia's laugh. "Perfect. She can analyze the wine pairings or something. Just keep her out of the main pictures. Evan's partners are going to be there. We need to look perfect." Click. The recorder went silent. This truth was different. It did not land with a crash. It landed like a pane of ice, sliding perfectly into the empty space in my chest. The bank fraud. The lies about the contract. That was just business. This was the system I had lived in my entire life, finally given a voice. This was the data for my invisibility. My mother, my sister, conspiring to ensure I was, quite literally, out of the picture. I looked at my mother. Her face was ashen, her mouth open, the silent sobs of a moment ago replaced by a frozen, wide-eyed terror. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Luther, as if he had just murdered her. Delia was just broken. The social media pressure she might have used as an excuse was revealed for what it was: a petty, cruel, and deeply ingrained jealousy, a need to be the only one in the light. Luther Hale did not look at any of them. He did not look at me. He looked at the centerpiece, the cold, congealing turkey. He steepled his fingers, the very picture of a chairman at the head of a board meeting. "That," he said, his voice calm, "is the last of the evidence. I am scheduled to meet with the trustees, the IRS, and the State Attorney General's office on Monday at 9 a.m. to file the official breach of trust and fiduciary malfeasance report, unless—" He let the word hang in the air. "Does anyone," he asked, his gaze slowly sweeping the table, "have any additions, any corrections, anything at all they would like to add to the official record before I file?" This was the moment. This was the legal, final nail. This was not a family dispute. This was a report of a crime. Evan Kress broke. He did not just crack. He shattered. He slumped forward, his hands on the table, his head down. "No, please," he stammered, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, Luther. Nurse Hale. It was a mistake, an accounting error. I can fix it. I will pay it back. I'll pay it back tomorrow. Today. Just, please, don't file that. I was just trying to impress her." Delia, in her last, dying reflex of self-preservation, finally snapped, but not at Evan. "It's the pressure!" she shrieked, her voice thin and ugly. "You don't understand. Everyone on social media, the expectations, you have to be perfect. You have to look a certain way. It's not real. It's not our fault." "Not your fault?" My father, Richard, finally roared. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He was not looking at Evan. He was looking at Luther. His face was a mask of purple rage. This is your fault. You sit there, on your throne of money, and you do this? You set these traps? You humiliate my daughter? You ruin this man? You record my wife? This is not family. This is a public execution. You've gone too far, old man. You've finally gone mad." Luther watched him, his face impassive. He waited for the tirade to run out of breath. My father stood there, panting, a vein throbbing in his temple. "I have not gone anywhere," Luther said, his voice a quiet, dangerous counterpoint to my father's rage. "And I have not done anything. I have simply observed and made adjustments." He reached into the briefcase one last time. He did not look. His hand knew exactly what it was looking for. He pulled out a single, thick document, bound in a dark blue cover. It was not a manila folder. It was a legal testament. "You are right, Richard," he said. "Things have changed. This is the draft of my new last will and testament." He slid it down the table. It stopped in front of my father's plate. My father stared at the title. "Last Will and Testament of Luther G. Hale," as if it were a bomb. "It is, as you see, unsigned," Luther continued, "but the provisions are new. I invite you to read Article 4. I call it the Honesty Clause." He did not need my father to read it. He recited it from memory. "It states that all inheritance, all board seats, all dividends from the Hale Trust, and all positions on the Hale Commons Board are now contingent on, and I quote, verifiable, ongoing acts of personal and professional integrity, an audit, to be performed annually by a third party." He looked around the table, at my weeping mother, my broken sister, the fraudulent fiancé, my enraged, impotent father. "As of this moment," he said, his voice flat, "no one at this table, except, perhaps, Maya, qualifies." Checkmate. It was not about the money that was stolen. It was about all the money that was to come. He had just disinherited them all, not with a pronouncement, but with a standard of ethics they could not possibly meet. The room was dead. This was the end. And then he turned to me, the eye of the hurricane, the only one left standing. "Oh, Maya," he said, his voice suddenly softer. He gestured to the wreckage, the key, the proposal, the new will. "You have the truth, you have the power, you have the key. The question is, what do you do with it? What is this for?" He leaned forward. Revenge or repair? This was the real test, the final one. I was silent for a full minute. I looked at the faces, Evan, the fraud, Delia, the illusion, my mother, the coward, my father, the enabler. I looked at the key to the Hale Commons. I thought of the garage. I thought of the server rooms. I thought of the clean, beautiful, logical systems I had built. "I am not interested in revenge," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. Revenge is a broken system. It's just noise. It is an inefficient emotional algorithm. I am an analyst. I do not break things. Grandpa, I fix them. I turned, not to my grandfather, but to Evan Kress. He looked up, his eyes red and terrified. "I choose transparency," I said, "and I choose real work." I laid out the terms. My voice was cold, clear, and administrative. "You, Mr. Kress, will publicly repay the $120,000, plus interest, to the Hale Family Trust. The wire transfer will be initiated by 9 a.m. Monday. You will cancel the Silver Briar estate contract. You will issue a public apology for the misallocation of charitable funds, and," I added, "your company, Kress Logistics, will volunteer for a full, independent, top-to-bottom operational audit to be designed and supervised by me. You will give me full access to your books. We will find all the errors." My grandfather's face did not move, but a small, slow smile touched the corners of his eyes. "That," he said, so quietly, only I could almost hear it, "that is the answer of a builder." I looked back at my family. My mother was staring, speechless. My father had collapsed into his chair. Delia looked utterly, completely lost. She had lost her fiancé, her wedding, and her entire future in the span of 30 minutes, and now I was Negotiating? No one at the table had been prepared for this. They had been prepared for a fight, for tears, for recriminations, for exile. They were not prepared for a third option. They were not prepared for the work. The room was a frozen tableau of my new terms. Evan Kress, a man reduced to his base components, just nodded, a jerky, desperate motion. He would do it. He would do anything. My father's rage had deflated, leaving him looking old and confused in his chair. Delia was staring at the space where her future had been, and my mother was just absent, her eyes glassy and fixed on the wall. I had given my terms, I had chosen repair, but I had no idea what to do next. We could not, surely, just pick up our forks and eat the cooling turkey. Luther watched me. He saw my logical, procedural mind hit this wall. I had solved the problem, but I did not know the next human step. He gave a single, satisfied nod, as if I had just completed a complex level of his simulation. "A builder's answer," he said again, this time for the room to hear. "Honest and efficient. I accept your terms. Maya, you will supervise the audit." He then looked at the rest of the table. "Well," he said, his voice almost light, "this meal, as you see it, is a failure. The performance is over. The food is cold. The polite lies are dead." He reached into the briefcase. I thought it was empty. It was not. He pulled out one last, thick, 9x12 envelope. It was unsealed. He reached inside and pulled out a single, typed sheet of paper. "Fortunately," he said, "I am a logistics man. I always have a contingency plan." He placed the paper on the table. "I call it the reverse Thanksgiving plan." No one understood. It was another one of his strange, coded declarations. "This," he said, gesturing to the ruined, 9-person dinner table, "was never the real dinner. This was the audit. The real dinner," he said, "is in the family room, and it is for 45. My mother's head snapped up. "What? 45? Dad? The staff? Maria. She only prepared for 9. "Maria," Luther said, "is an excellent caterer. She has been preparing for 45 for 3 weeks, on my private order." He stood up, his full, imposing height casting a shadow over the table. "You see, I have become tired of this performance." He gestured to the untouched turkey. "I am tired of celebrating gratitude with people who are only grateful for their own reflections. I decided this year we would do it differently. We would eat with the people who are never invited to the table, the people who are invisible, the people who actually do the work." He walked, not to the kitchen, but to the tall, paneled oak doors at the far end of the dining room, doors that led to the adjoining family room, a room we never used, as we were not that kind of family. He put his hands on the brass handles. "I have invited," he said, his voice ringing in the room, "3 of my oldest tenants, who live alone and whose families have forgotten them. I have invited the night shift supervisors from my main Denver warehouse, who are working tonight, but whose families are here. I have invited 3 foster families from the county program, the one the trust is supposed to support, and—" He turned, his eyes finding me. "I have invited the entire volunteer team from the North Denver Food and Logistics Co-op, the one you've been working with, quietly, for 3 years." My heart stopped. The group I helped, the ones I... With a dramatic, smooth motion, he pulled the heavy doors open. The scene beyond was a different universe. The family room, normally dark and funereal, was blazing with light. Long folding tables had been set up, covered in simple, warm red tablecloths, and the room was full. It was full of people, talking, laughing, children playing on the floor, and the smell. It was not the scent of polite, herb-roasted turkey. It was the rich, deep, joyful smell of roasted corn, tamales, macaroni and cheese, baked ham, and 3 other kinds of pie. It was the smell of a real feast. A woman with a kind, wrinkled face looked up and saw me. It was Mrs. Sanchez, the head of the co-op. She broke into a huge smile. "Maya, you are here. Your grandfather told us this was your house. And standing near her, holding a catering tray, was Maria, the head caterer from our kitchen. Not in her stiff black and white uniform, but in a simple apron, laughing at something a man in a warehouse uniform had said. My grandfather stood in the doorway, a bridge between two worlds. He looked back at the cold, silent, 9-person table of ruin. Then he looked at the warm, loud, 45-person room of community. He looked at my mother, my father, at Delia and Evan. This, he said, his voice soft now, is the new measure. Family is not who you are born to. It is who you are willing to add a chair for. He gestured to the untouched food on our mahogany table. The staff will clear this away, but the real meal is in there. The choice is simple. You can stay here, in the dark, with your cold plates, or you can come in and help me serve. He turned and walked into the bright, loud room, leaving us behind. We were left in the silence. The judgment was over. The choice was ours. My father was still in his chair, poleaxed. My mother was weeping again, but this time it was a different, broken kind of weeping. Delia was staring at her hands. And then Evan Kress moved. He stood up. His suit was wrinkled. His face was a pale, sweaty mess. But he stood. He did not look at Delia. He looked at me, just for a second. His eyes filled with a raw, terrifying, and deserved shame. Then he looked at the open doorway. He walked, his steps stiff, out of the dark dining room and into the light. He did not try to join a conversation. He walked straight past Mrs. Sanchez, straight to Maria. We could hear his voice, hoarse and low. "Excuse me, ma'am. Where are the dirty dishes? I can wash. I'm a hard worker." Maria, not knowing who he was or what had just happened, just saw a man in a nice suit offering to help. She smiled and handed him an apron. "We've got a mountain. Honey, start stacking." He took the apron. It was the first honest act of labor I had ever seen him perform. It was the first step. The sound of his action broke the spell. Delia looked up. Her face was naked. The mask of the perfect girl was gone. All the makeup, all the expensive hair. It was just a shell. She was just a person, and she was terrified. She looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones. Not tears of rage, but tears of shame. "Maya," she whispered. Her voice was raw. That group chat." She took a shuddering breath. I am so sorry. It was a horrible thing to say. A horrible... She did not make an excuse. She did not blame social media. She did not blame the pressure. She just said it. "I am sorry." I did not forgive her. I did not say, "It's okay." I just nodded. Once, acknowledging the data. It was her first step. She stood up, shaky, and walked, not to Evan, but to an empty chair at the end of a long table, and sat down, alone. My mother was next. She was quiet for a long time. She looked at her husband, who was still frozen. She looked at me. "I have swallowed," she whispered, her voice thick with self-loathing. "So much pride, so much ugly, stupid pride. I wanted to be perfect, a perfect family." She looked at me, her eyes finally clear. "I have not seen you. Maya, I have refused to see you, because you were not perfect, like her. You were just real, and it scared me." She stood up. "I am going to help Maria serve the pie." My father was the last one left. He was alone at the massive, ruined table. He looked at me. His rage was gone. He just looked defeated. He was a man whose entire operating system had just been declared obsolete. "He's giving it all away," he muttered, still in shock. "The commons, the trust. He's built this thing for you." "He built it," I said, "for the community." "Right." He rubbed his face. He looked at the legal document, the unsigned will. Honesty, labor, integrity. He let out a dry, harsh laugh. He looked at his soft, manicured hands. Then he looked at me, a new, strange request in his eyes. That building, he said. The Hale Commons. You said it has a kitchen? A big one? Yes, I said, confused. A commercial-grade kitchen. Right, he nodded, as if to himself. Big kitchens. They have plumbing, they have electrical, they have gas lines. Things break. He looked at me. I'm good with my hands. I was, a long time ago, before this. He gestured to the room. I want to sign up. I want to volunteer. Not for the board, for the maintenance, the kitchen, monthly. It was the most honest, real thing he had ever offered. He was offering his work. I nodded. I'll put you on the schedule. I turned and left him there. I walked into the light. The room was loud, chaotic, and warm. My grandfather was in the corner, deep in a technical conversation with a warehouse supervisor about shipping routes. He saw me. He did not smile, but his eyes were bright. He had built this, his third, truest option. And then, I was no longer the analyst. I was no longer the ghost. I was just Maya. Mrs. Sanchez grabbed my arm. Maya, thank God, we are out of soup bowls. I felt a switch flip. This was not a family drama. This was a logistics problem. Okay, I said, my voice clear and strong. The main dining room has 10 full-place settings. Maria, can we get those bowls? We can use the salad plates for the pie. And you, I said to a lanky teenager, you're tall. Can you get the extra napkins from the top shelf in the pantry? I moved through the room. I assigned tables. I refilled water glasses. I talked to the elderly tenants about their apartments. I talked to the foster kids about the video games they were playing on a small handheld. It was natural. It was easy. It was just a system. And I knew how to make it run. My grandfather watched me, a small, private smile on his face. He looked, I thought, like a man who had been working on a complex mathematical problem for 50 years and had just watched the final, elegant solution write itself out on the page. Later, much later, the magnificent cold turkey from the main table was brought out. It was no longer a symbol of status. It was just food. My grandfather picked up the stag-handled carving knife. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. He handed it to me. I looked at the massive bird, and I looked at the 45 new faces, all mixed in with my broken, rebuilding family. I took the knife, and I began to carve, making sure everyone, for the first time in this house, got an equal share. It was late. The last of the guests from the reverse Thanksgiving had been driven home, the laughter and warmth fading into the cold November night. The catering staff had cleaned and left. The house was finally, truly, silent. It was almost 3 a.m. We were back in the formal dining room, but it was no longer a stage. It was just a room. The wreckage of the first dinner had been cleared. All that remained was the long, polished mahogany table, reflecting the dim pre-dawn light filtering in from the windows. My father sat, exhausted, in his chair. My mother and Delia were on the sofa near the unlit fireplace, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale and scrubbed clean of makeup. Evan Kress sat apart, in a hard-backed chair, looking like a man awaiting a verdict. My grandfather, who seemed to be energized by the night's events, stood at the head of the table. He had his briefcase, but it was closed. He was not finished. He walked to the sideboard and retrieved the thick, blue-bound document, the unsigned draft of his will. He placed it in the center of the table. Then, he took his fountain pen, the blue-black ink, from his jacket pocket, uncapped it, and laid it neatly beside the document. The pen and the will, the tools of finality. "The night is over," he said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the still room. "Now, the work begins." He looked at me. This document, as I mentioned, is a draft, but its terms are simple. He explained the vast majority of his wealth, the real estate, the liquid assets, the entire Hale portfolio, was to be folded into the Hale Family Trust, and the trust's sole beneficiary and directive would be the funding and operation of the Hale Commons and the expansion of its mission. The rest, he said, and his eyes flickered to my parents and Delia. The personal effects, the houses, they are to be divided if, and only if, the recipients meet the community labor condition, a minimum of 200 verifiable hours of service per year to the Commons or a related approved charity, no exceptions, no buyouts, no shortcuts. It was a life sentence of work, of accountability. He then tapped the document, Article 5, the executor, the one who enforces this, the one who runs the audit, the one who signs off on those hours. He looked at me. That person is you, Maya. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was one thing to be given a key to a building. It was another to be made the moral arbiter of my entire family. I started. Grandpa, that's an impossible position. I know, he said, which is why I included an executor's conscience clause. You have the right to refuse the role. You can pass it to a third party, a bank, a lawyer, but in doing so, you give up your control. You give up your ability to shape the system. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, the pen lay between them. So, he asks me again, after all you have seen tonight, after all you have lived through, are you willing to accept this role? Are you willing to be the one who checks the work? It is a job that will last for decades, and for most of those decades, Maya, he gestured to my family, will misunderstand you. They will resent you. They will see you as a jailer, not a builder. He was offering me the ultimate, thankless task, the position of being the permanent, logical, unfeeling other daughter, but with his full authority. I looked at the unsigned will. I looked at the pen. I thought of my black, dot-grid notebook. I thought of my entry. I fix systems. I will accept, I said. My mother's head snapped up. My father closed his eyes. I will accept, I said again, my voice stronger. On 3 conditions. Luther's eyebrows raised. He had not expected this. This is not a monarchy, Grandpa, and I am not a queen. If I am to be the executor of a trust based on integrity, then the trust itself must be transparent. My conditions are the conditions of a good system. I stood up. I was no longer a guest. I was an administrator. On one, I said, the audit is not just for them. It is for everyone, including me. My hours, my work, my compensation as director will be independently audited annually. 2, I continued. The process will be public, not the family's personal details, but the verifiable hours, a timesheet, a public-facing report from the Commons showing the work done and who did it. If they work the hours, they get the credit and the inheritance. If they do not, it is not my opinion, it is a fact. The data will speak for itself. No resentment, just numbers. And 3, I said, I have the final say on the audit, but I will not be the auditor. We will hire a neutral, third-party firm to design and execute the audits. I will simply be the one who reads their report. I looked at him. I will build a system. I will not build a throne. My grandfather stared at me for a long, long time. The room was breathless. I had just negotiated the terms of his legacy. He broke into a slow, wide smile. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly, genuinely smile. It was like watching a mountain crack open. A system, he said, and he sounded delighted. Of course, a transparent, audited system. You are my granddaughter. Maya, you are a builder. He picked up the pen. The conditions are accepted. He turned to the family. This is the new contract, and it is being signed tonight. But first, the work. He looked at Evan. Mr. Kress, my granddaughter offered you terms, an audit, repayment. Do you agree? Evan Kress, A man who had been given a lifeline stood up. He walked to the table. I agree. My grandfather pushed a single sheet of paper and the pen toward him. Then sign the pledge, Evan signed, a commitment to repayment, and to submit to a full binding audit by Maya Whitaker or her designated appointee. Luther then looked at Delia. She was still on the couch, looking small. I can't do maintenance, she whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know how to fix things. No one asked you to, I said, my voice not unkind. The Commons will have a vocational program, job skills, resumes, interview coaching. Delia looked up, her old world meeting my new one. I'm a marketing VP. I'm good at that. At presentations, at branding. Then you will sign up, I said. To volunteer 200 hours. You will teach the communications and professional skills class to the teens in the program. Her eyes widened. It was work, but it was work she could do. It was a place for her. She nodded, slowly. I can do that. My grandfather pushed another sheet. The volunteer pledge, Delia signed. My mother stood up. I can't teach a class. I don't know what I can do. She looked at me, her eyes raw. Maya, all those years, the things I said, the things on that tape. How do I start? You will start, I said, by listening. You will be on the intake committee. You will sit and you will listen to the stories of the people who come to the Commons. You will do their intake paperwork, and you will audit. You will audit all the things you have said, and you will learn to say new ones. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I can listen. She signed the pledge. Finally, my father. He stood up. He did not sign anything. He walked out of the room. I thought, for a moment, he had refused. He returned a minute later, holding his old, beautiful, leather-bound tool roll, the one from his garage days. He unrolled it on the table. It was full of immaculate, expensive, old-world tools. This, he said, his voice thick, is for the workshop, at the Commons. He pushed it toward me. And I'll need a new one. He met my eyes. I'll need a shopping list for the maintenance closet. I want to build it from scratch. Properly. I'll have a budget and a parts list on your desk by Monday, I said. He nodded. Good. He signed his pledge. The room was quiet. The contracts were signed. The new system was in place. My grandfather, Luther Hale, looked at the signed pledges. He looked at the family, exhausted, broken, but committed. He picked up his fountain pen. He turned to the last page of the thick, blue-bound will. He signed his name, Luther G. Hale. The sound of the pen nib scratching across the heavy paper was the only sound. It was not a sound of finality. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. It was the sound of a house breathing out, a long, slow sigh of relief. He capped the pen. He looked at me, his eyes clear and bright, despite the hour. He picked up the heavy brass key, the one to the Hale Commons. He held it out to me. Your work starts Monday. Director Whitaker. I took the key. It was heavy in my palm, and warm. As I closed my hand around it, the first, thin, gray-blue light of dawn began to creep through the curtains. It was Thanksgiving morning. The light sliced across the room, illuminating the dark, polished wood. It hit the black, dot-grid notebook I had left on my chair. I walked over and picked it up. I opened it to the last page I had written, the flowchart of his test. And as the light grew stronger, it illuminated the last line I had written, years ago, and had copied into every notebook since. Don't let yourself disappear. I looked at the key in my other hand. I looked at my family, asleep in their chairs. I looked at the signed pledges. I uncapped my own pen. I drew a single, neat, respectful line through that old sentence, and underneath it, in the new light of the morning, I wrote the new directive. Make room for others to appear. We had slept for just 3 hours, not in beds, but in the armchairs and sofas of the family room. A shipwrecked crew washed ashore after the storm. The dawn had broken, and now, at noon on Thanksgiving Day, the house was stirring again. But it was not a slow, quiet morning. It was a new kind of mobilization. My father, true to his word, was in the kitchen, not drinking coffee, but taking a meticulous inventory of the commercial-grade freezers with Maria. My mother was quietly, methodically, setting out new, simpler plates on the long tables, her hands trembling, but her actions precise. Delia was helping Evan, who was dressed in his wrinkled, expensive suit from the night before, load all the high-end, untouched floral arrangements from the first dinner into the back of his truck, to be delivered to the county nursing home. It was work. It was quiet, unglamorous, necessary work. And at 12:30, the front doors opened again. This was the second wave of my grandfather's reverse Thanksgiving plan. The first wave had been the families, the workers, the tenants. This second wave, this was the street-level group, the volunteers I worked with, the ones who ran the late-night shelters, the ones who knew what true scarcity looked like. They came in, not with the polished politeness of my family's circle, but with a loud, chaotic, joyful energy. They brought more pies. They brought a guitar. The house, which for 30 years had been a cold monument to status, was now a loud, warm, sprawling community center. The long tables from the family room were now extended, connected to the massive, polished mahogany table in the formal dining room, creating one long, unbroken, 80-foot line of mismatched tablecloths and chairs. My grandfather watched it all from the head of the table. He was in his usual spot, but the table and the family had been redrawn around him. He stood up. He did not tap a glass. He simply stood. And the room, sensing his gravity, quieted. He had his briefcase. It was on the table in front of him, a familiar, scarred presence, but this time, it was not an object of dread. It was a podium. He placed his hands on it. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying easily over the 85 people now gathered in his house. "Welcome to Coyote Bluffs. Many of you know me as a landlord, or a signature on a check, or just the old man. Today, that changes." He looked around the room, at my father, who had paused with his inventory list, at my mother, at Delia, at Evan, who had just come back inside. "I have spent my life building systems," he announced, "and I have come to learn that my most important system, my family, was broken. It was inefficient. It was running on bad code. Last night, we began a full diagnostic. Today, we are installing the new operating system." He gestured to the document that was sitting on top of his closed briefcase. The will. "I want to make 3 things public," he said. "This is not a private matter. This is a structural change. First, last night, I signed my new last will and testament. The future of the Hale estate is no longer about blood. It is about work. The entirety of my assets are now legally bound to serve the community through the Hale Commons and through the labor of anyone who wishes to be a part of it." A murmur went through the room, not of greed, but of shock. "Second," he said, and his eyes found me. "A system needs an administrator, the executor of this new trust, and the executive director of the Hale Commons is my granddaughter, Maya Whitaker." 85 pairs of eyes turned on me. I felt the heat, the weight, of that unified gaze. I was no longer invisible. I was, suddenly, terrifyingly, visible. "And third," he said, "as of today, this house, Coyote Bluffs, is no longer a private estate. It is a satellite house for the Hale Commons. Every holiday, every major event, its doors will be open, the table will be set, and the new requirement for a seat is that you bring someone who has never been invited before." He looked at the crowd. He looked at me, and then he did the most terrifying thing of all. He gestured to me, a public passing of the torch. "My granddaughter," he said, "the director, has something she would like to say." He sat down. I was standing, alone, at the head of this new, massive, chaotic family. The key to the commons was a heavy, cold weight in my pocket. I did not have a speech. I did not have a plan. I was an analyst, not an orator. So I fell back on what I knew. I fell back on the data. "My grandfather is right," I said, my voice, to my surprise, clear and steady. I'm a systems analyst. I look for empty spaces. I look for waste." I looked at the crowd. We talk a lot about the table, who has a seat, who doesn't, but I think we're missing the point. I think the real work is in the empty chair. I took a breath. "I want to tell you 3 quick stories about 3 empty chairs. The first," I said, "was in my 3rd grade classroom. There was a boy, Alex, who was in a wheelchair, and every time we had a surprise assembly, he was left behind, because the system to get him to the auditorium was too slow, too complicated. His chair was always empty, and we, the other kids, we were taught, by the system, that his absence was normal. We learned not to see the empty chair." I looked at my mother, who was watching me, her eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time. "The second," I said, "was at my first job. It was a big tech firm. We had a lunch table, the engineers, and we had a quiet, older woman who cleaned the office. She would eat her lunch, alone, at a desk in the hallway. We never invited her. We never even saw her. Her chair was empty, and we walked right past it. It was efficient." I looked at my father, who was staring at his own hands, the hands he had offered to the commons. "And the 3rd empty chair," I said, "was at this table, in this room, for 30 years. It was my chair. I was here. But I was invisible, my family. We were all so busy performing, so busy looking perfect, that we normalized that empty chair. I was the empty chair, and it was a system." I looked at Delia, who was crying, but it was a quiet, understanding kind of cry. I don't have a big plan," I said, my voice thick, "but I have a first step. I'm an analyst. I like actionable data." I pointed to the small stacks of index cards and pens that I had asked my mother to place on the tables. "There are cards, and there are pens, and my only request, for this new family, is this. I want you to take one, and I want you to write down the name of one person. One Alex, one cleaner, one Maya, one person you have left in the hallway, one person whose empty chair you have normalized." I picked up a card myself, and then, "I want you to make a commitment, a logistical commitment, that within the next 30 days, you will find that person, and you will invite them to your table. You will fill that one empty chair." The room was silent, and then, slowly, a man from the warehouse picked up a card. Mrs. Sanchez picked one up. My father, my mother, and Delia. They all reached for a card. I looked down at my own card, and I wrote, "Mom, Dad, Delia." And as I was writing, a new sound, a chair scraping. Evan Kress was standing up. His face was still pale, but his eyes were clear. He was holding the pledge he had signed at 3 a.m. I'd like to add to the record, too," he said, his voice hoarse. He was not looking at my grandfather, or at me. He was looking at the room, at the tenants, at the volunteers. "My name is Evan Kress," he said, "and I am a fraud." A gasp went through the room. Delia looked up, her hand over her mouth. "Last night," Evan said, his voice shaking, "I was exposed for stealing $120,000 from the Hale Family Trust. From these people, from you." He took a deep breath. "This is not an apology. It is a public statement of fact. I have signed a legally binding document to repay every cent with interest and to submit my failed company to a full audit by Director Whitaker. He looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible, earned shame. And I want to say, for the record, that I am the first person who needs to sign up for those labor hours. I will be at the Commons on Monday to wash or sweep or whatever. He sat down. The room was stunned, and then, slowly, Mrs. Sanchez, from the food co-op, began to clap. It was not a polite clap. It was a real, solid, work-worn clap, and then the warehouse supervisor joined, and then my father, and soon, the whole room was applauding. They were not applauding the money. They were applauding the truth. They were applauding the work. In the middle of the applause, Delia stood up. She was trembling. And she started. That wedding, the Silverbriar estate. She looked at Evan, who just nodded, giving her the space. I am canceling it, she said, and a new, strange, strong voice emerged. I am canceling the performance, and if he will still have me after all this. She looked at Evan, and he looked at her, and it was the first real moment I had ever seen between them. We would like to get married, she said, at the Hale Commons, not a gala, but a party, a community party, after our hours are done, and we would like to invite all of you to help us serve the food. A surprised, delighted laugh rippled through the room. My grandfather threw his head back and laughed, a deep, booming, joyful sound. My mother stood up, and for the first time, she walked to Delia, and she hugged her, a real hug. And then she turned to me. She walked across the small space that had always separated us. She did not say, I'm sorry. She did not say, I love you. She stood in front of me, this woman who I had never, ever been able to reach. And she put her arms around me. She pulled me in, her hug clumsy, but strong. She held me for a long, silent moment, and then she pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, her eyes finally, focused on me. I see you, she whispered, just that. I see you now. Later, much later, the sun was setting, the house was full of the sound of the guitar, of stories, of promises being made. The family portrait was no longer a static, perfect, posed photograph. It was a loud, chaotic, messy, moving, living thing. My grandfather found me by the fireplace. He was holding his briefcase, and it was closed, but it was not locked. Well, director, he said, the title feeling strange and new. A good day's work. It's a start, I said. Indeed. He looked at the briefcase, this object that had held so much power, so much truth, so much dread. He patted the worn leather. This has been my system for a long time, my external hard drive. He set it down. But I am an old man, and this is a heavy, outdated piece of equipment. The future, he said, is in a different format. He reached, not into the briefcase, but into the deep pocket of his tweed jacket. He pulled something out. It was a small, black, hardbound, dot-grid notebook, identical to the ones he had given me when I was 12. It was empty. It was clean. It was a new, blank system. He placed it in my hands. The work is not done, he said, his voice a low, final instruction. It is never done. Keep writing, Maya, keep recording. But this time, make sure what we build today has enough room for all the people who were never, ever invited. I looked at him, I looked at the notebook, and I looked at the room, full of life. I spent the rest of the evening not as an analyst, not as a director, but just as Maya. I ate pie. I listened to the warehouse supervisor's stories. I even, for a moment, danced with Mrs. Sanchez. As the last of the new, extended, chaotic family left, I found myself alone at the massive oak doors of the big house. It was my job. now, to lock up. I turned the heavy, old-fashioned deadbolt. The click of the lock settling into place echoed in the quiet hall. I stood there, in the silence, holding the heavy brass key to the Hale Commons in one hand and the new, empty black notebook in the other. I looked down the hall, to the dining room, where my grandfather's old, worn leather briefcase sat on the floor, by his chair, finally, and completely, closed. And I smiled. The Thanksgiving dinner at Coyote Bluffs had, at last, truly ended. It did not end with dessert, or coffee, or polite goodbyes. It ended with a new structure, a new, living blueprint for a family, built not on perfection, or performance, or blood, but on transparency, on responsibility, and on the promise, always, of one more empty chair, waiting to be filled. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments, so we can connect and share our thoughts. Subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.